So what question really is Nogeya in Chutz La'aretz regarding Shviis? So this morning we will be discussing an interesting endeavor, which merits to be analyzed and discussed. I know there are various different groups that are selling land in Chutz La'aretz. You buy a piece of land in Israel to be Mekayim, the mitzvah of Shviis ha'aretz. Does that make sense? Is it important? Now, whenever I say a shiur on any contemporary issue, I just need to hope I'm not going to offend anyone, because whatever you say, you could offend someone. So I don't know whether anybody living in Teaneck is engaged in selling land in Israel. I don't know how much money you invested. But if you invested money in Israel, it's always a good investment, and it's always kedai. Buying land in Israel has proven itself as a good investment. Prices only go up in real estate. But I'm not sure the 3 square foot that you buy somewhere out there and you don't know exactly where it is. So are you mekayim the mitzvah of Shemitah? So this discussion would naturally start off in Menachos Daf Mem Aleph. Menachos Daf Mem Aleph, we have the most important source. That it is important for a person not only to be mekayim the mitzvahs that he is mechuyav, not only to observe the mitzvahs which are incumbent upon him, which he is obligated to observe, but even try to take upon himself chiyuvim which he wasn't previously obliged to take upon himself. And what the Gemara deals with in Menachos Mem Aleph, and I think it is the only source in Bavli and in Yerushalmi, at least to the best of my recollection, in which a malach taught a halacha to one of the Amoraim. An angel taught Torah to an Amora. We're not going to speak today about the sugya of Torah lo b'shamayim, whether an angel has the authority to teach us halacha. That is separate discussion. But Menachos Mem Aleph Amud Aleph, Omalei malacha l'Rav Katina. An angel told Rav Katina, Be'ina deritcha, in a moment of wrath, in a moment of anger, anshiso mitzvahs asei. And the Gemara deals with tzitzis. As long as you don't wear dalet kanfis, you don't have a mitzvah of tzitzis. Theoretically, a person could go through all his life without wearing tzitzis, and he is not liable. Because if you don't have a garment that has dalet kanfis, you don't have a chiyuv tzitzis. But the angel told Rav Katina, don't think so. In a moment of anger in the heavens, Lefnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you will be punished for not wearing tzitzis. But you don't have dalet kanfis. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu will be angry with you. Why don't you have dalet kanfis? Why didn't you make an effort to have dalet kanfis and to be mekayim mitzvah tzitzis? So it is from this Gemara that we learn, we are required and we are expected not only to be mekayim all the mitzvahs that are a chiyuv. You need to daven 3 times a day. You need to say Kriyas Mashachas Zohavis. You need to put on tefillin every day, and Kedusha V'Avdalt, and all the other mitzvahs. You are even required to buy a garment that will obligate you to put on tzitzis. Would it be the same? Buy a piece of land in Israel to be mekayim the mitzvah of Shemitah. Is this Gemara specifically about tzitzis, or is it a general rule about other mitzvahs that would be similar to tzitzis? Tosfos, the beginning of Eirochin, Menachos Mem Aleph, Tosfos maintains this rule is only about tzitzis. And why is that? One could imagine, maybe because of the centrality and importance of mitzvahs tzitzis. And Simach Chov Dalet and Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim, the Tur, Shulchan Aruch in the very first Sif, and the first source is the Rambam, Tur, and the Shulchan Aruch. These are the 3 most important sources of halacha. These are the 3 giants, the Rambam, the Tur, and the Shulchan Aruch. And they all say, even though a person is not obliged to wear tzitzis if he doesn't have a beged that has four corners, a beged that has dalat kanfis. But it is ra'ui that every man should have a talis cotton, because mitzvah tzitzis is essentially about remembering all the other mitzvahs. There is only a handful of mitzvahs upon which Chazal say, Shkula mitzvah tzitzis keneged kol mitzvah shabbat. And why is that? And I'm quoting the Lashon of the two on the Shulchan Aruch. That's an interesting expression that we find both in the Torah and in the Shulchan Aruch. We all need this reminder. We need this reminder every hour and every moment. So one could imagine maybe this halacha is specifically and exclusively only about tzitzis because of the importance of mitzvahs tzitzis. But Tosfos gives us another reasoning, a different rationale. And Tosfos says because in their day and age, everybody wore tzitzis. And if you don't wear tzitzis, it seems to be that you don't really care for mitzvahs. Everybody does. Why don't you? Why are you an exception? And that is why, be'idne daritcha anshinan, if you don't wear tzitzis. So according to Tosfos' approach, it doesn't depend on the essence of the mitzvah, but more on a social norm. If this is a mitzvah that all the others are diligent about, and you are moitzi atzmachu min haklal, that is what provokes the wrath of a Kodesh Baruch Hu. So do we find similar halacha elsewhere? We do in Simon Kuf Chav Ches, Shulchan Aruch Chaim. Everybody should remember what's Kuf Chav Ches, and that is the mitzvah of Berachas Koyanim, Nesias Kapayim. So the Shulchan Aruch says, a kohen she'ein roitzel alis leduchan, if a kohen doesn't want to go up and he doesn't want to duchan, then he needs to step out of the shul before they start Berachas Hu Avoido, because that is when the kohenim need to step forward and to be Oler Leduchan and to bestow Kodesh Baruch Hu's bracha, blessing upon the entire congregation. And the Mishnah Berurah writes, doesn't mean that if you just don't feel like duchening, you're entitled to step out of shul. No. Be'idna deritcha. The Mishnah Berurah compares it with the Gemara Menachos Daf Mem Aleph. You can't just, because you don't feel like you'd go out of shul if you don't want to duchen. No. That is punishable. Be'idna deritcha, that's punishable. What the Shulchan Aruch means to say, if a kohen is shvach, he's weak, he's not feeling well, it's an effort for him to step up and to stand and to duchen. Because if he can, he is not allowed to go out of shul. So this Mishnah Berurah proves it's not exclusively only about tzitzis because of the importance of tzitzis. Berachas Koyanim doesn't bring to mind all the other mitzvahs. Nowhere do we find about Berachas Koyanim shkula keneged kol mitzvahs shebetoira. But the logic of Tosfos would apply to Berachas Kahanim as well. You're in shul. You're already here. And all the other Koyanim will be Yoyle Leduchen. And you make yourself an exception. And you're going to go out of shul. That is exactly like the argument of Tosfos. All the others are wearing tzitzis. Why are you an exception? You should go with the flow of good people. They're all serious about their mitzvahs. Why are you moitzi atzmai min haklal? And that logic would apply to Berachas Koyanim as well. Years ago, and this was one of the happiest shilas I ever was asked. Young soldier called me, I think he was in Sanchanim or Golani, I don't even remember which unit it was, but one of the elite units in the army, and they needed to run, he and his friends, 10 kilometers, and it was a chamsin, it was a hot day, and they needed to run 10 Ks, 10 kilometers, and he asked me, could he take off his tzitzis? Because if you need to run 10 kilometers in the Middle Eastern sun, in the middle of the summer, every ounce, that you carry on your body is a big effort. They took along tons of water, and he asked me, could I take off my tzitzis? Well, I said, If the Mishnah Berurah says, and that is his interpretation of the Shulchan Aruch, that a kohen shu chalash, and it's hard for him to be oile leduchen, then he could step out of shul. Well, running 10 kilometers in the Middle Eastern heat in the middle of the summer probably would be as hard as even a person that's not very strong, he's not feeling very well, but just step forward to the Urine Kodesh and turn around for 5 minutes and lift your hands. So I told him, yes, you're entitled to take off your tzitzis, but if you do wear your tzitzis on that run, then you could expect a big chunk of olam haba for that mitzvah. Day later he calls me and he says, Rav, I didn't take my tzitzis off, and I made it with tzitzis. And I said, Tovay broch al reishcho, and makam your olam haba for this mitzvah. So it is from this sugya that we learn it is not enough to be makayim the mitzvahs that are a chiyuv upon you. Chacham leiv yikach mitzvahs. It is a chachmam. Moshe Rabbeinu, that's a Gemara in Soita Daf Yud Daled, begged and pleaded with the Kodesh Baruch Hu. He wants to come into Eretz Yisrael. And the Gemara says, "V'chilechol meperoiseyo hoyoroitzer." Why was it so important for Moshe Rabbeinu to come into Eretz Yisrael? Lo nesava Moshe elo lakayem mitzvahs hatluyas ba'oretz. Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to come into the land, into the promised land, not only to bask in its glory, but to be mekayim the mitzvahs hatluyas ba'oretz. That's the Gemara in Soita Daf Yud Daled. So it is here once again that we see a person should pursue mitzvahs. He should do his best, even though right here and now he's not mechuyev. So being me'ever Yarden, Moshe Rabbeinu didn't have the mitzvah of Trumas HaMaises and all the other mitzvahs that Luis Boretz, but Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to be mekayim those mitzvahs. So if I stop right here and now and ask you, so is it an inyan to buy a piece of land in Israel to be mekayim the mitzvah of Shviis? Not necessarily. I think there's a difference between mitzvahs asay, in which a person engages in kum v'asay, and mitzvot lo ta'aseh, which a person performs by sheva al taisa, just abstaining or refraining from doing an aveira. And I also think there's a difference between mitzvahs that are essentially avoidance hukeil and other mitzvahs that are all about the result. So one of the asaidas that comes back again and again in my forum is this distinction between two different categories and two different types of mitzvot asay. Many mitzvahs are all about the result. Asiyas hamake b'rosh hagag. Nobody chas v'sholom should be killed by falling down. B'yer chometz, because you're not allowed to have chometz. Milas habein. Every Jew should have the chosen, ois bris kodesh of Avraham Avinu, and many, many other mitzvahs. Some mitzvahs are not about the result. They actually don't really have a practical result. These are the mitzvahs that are the essence of avoidance ukeil, the essence of being a good Jew. Avoidance ukeil, serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So one of the big klolim in my shiurim is, so the Rambam writes in the beginning of Hilchos Tefillah, Chayavudim le'espalel b'kol yoyim. Both the Kesef Mishnah and the Lechem Mishnah contemplate, how does the Rambam know that mitzvahs Tefillah is b'kol yoyim? The Rambam clearly says, mitzvahs asay shel Torah she'espalel odem b'kol yoyim. How do we know? The source of mitzvahs Tefillah is in Safri, also once in Shas. Tanis Beis Aleph, Lo Avde B'chol Avavcha, Meis Avodah Shebelev, Zut Filo. But where in this posuk is it specified that this mitzvah is every day? Rambam Perek Yud Daled Milchas Tefillah writes, Chayovim Koyanim Levorech Es Yisrael B'kol Yoim. How do we know? Koisav Orches B'nei Yisrael Amor Lehem. Posuk doesn't say B'kol Yom. It's not in the Rambam, but the Kesef Mishnah Perek Heim Yesoida HaTorah, not in Hilchos Tefillin, but rather in Yesoida HaTorah Perek Hey, the Kesef Mishnah says, Mitzvahs tefillin rests upon us every day. How do we know? Several parashiyos in the Torah which we learned tefillin, no remez that is b'kol yom. So listen to what I say, because this is a klal gadol. Kol ha-mitzvahs shebet-Torah, all the mitzvahs in Torah's Moshe, that are essentially avoidance ukeil, they bear no result, no outcome. It's not about creating a matzav al yedei ha-mitzvah. All the mitzvahs that are essentially, purely avoidance ukeil, either they're associated with Shabbos and Yom Tov, if not, all these mitzvahs are b'kol yom. Because the routine of a Jew is a routine of avodas Hashem. We don't need a source that tefillah b'kol yom. Neither berachas koyanim, neither tefillin. Goes without saying. Goes without saying. So every mitzvah in the Torah that is pure avodas ukeil, essentially avodas Hashem, either associated with Shabbos and Yom Tov, kedusha v'avdalta, sukkah v'lulav, matzah v'moroyer. If not, in the most natural way, this is a mitzvah of Seder Hayom. Because the Seder Hayom Shel Odom Yisrael, the routine of a Jew is a routine of avodas ukeil. This is what life is all about. That's why we're around. So once again, I think that this principle, that a person should be roidei flakayim es mitzvahs, you're not mechuyev, but be mechuyev. Take it upon yourself. Why are you losing out? Is only by mitzvahs to say, and only by avodas Hashem. Tzitzis is not about the result. It doesn't have a result. Tzitzis is about it is about avodas ukeil. Berachas koyanim is the same. But by mitzvahs that are all about the result, there is no inyan. Take upon yourself. And that is why in Minchas Osha, Masechet Psochim Simen Zayin, I disagreed with the Minchas Chinuch. The Minchas Chinuch says, if you don't have chumetz out of Pesach, you should buy chumetz to perform the mitzvah of Sreifas chumetz. And I wonder, I'm not sure that that's an Indian, because Sreifas chumetz is not essentially avodas Hashem. It is about not having chumetz on Pesach. Most people have chumetz out of Pesach, so you need to burn it and see to it. You shouldn't be over on lo yarov lo yamotza. So, in my opinion, I don't think there would be an Indian to buy, unless you're aware of Reb Pinchas Mekoretz. Anybody know who was Reb Pinchas Mekoretz? Ever hear about the Pinchas Mekoretz? He was a Talmud of the Baal Shem Tov, and there's a Sefer Imre Pinchas. And he writes, when we burn the chumetz, you need to bear in mind to destroy all the evil and all the avodas, all of the entire world. And if everybody would know that and bear that in mind, Mashiach would be here long ago. So according to the Pinchas Koretz, maybe there is an Ian. Buy chumetz. Burn the chumetz. Burn all the evil in the world. Well, that's a Hasidic thought, but by halachic definition, I don't think there's an Indian to buy chumetz in order to burn chumetz. If it's all about not having chumetz, I don't have chumetz. So what's the point in having in order not to have? But interesting, the Chazon Ish, not in Psochim, but in Masechet Demai, Simen Zayin, Ois Beis, Chazon Ish speaks about biur ma'asos. And he writes, if you don't have Maisa, then you don't have the mitzvah of biur ma'asos once in 4 years. But then he says, but maybe there's an Indian to achieve Maisa, to be Mevayar, like a biur chumetz. And the Chazon Ish says it's a midas chasidus to acquire chumetz in order to burn chumetz. To me, that is a big chiddush. Coming back to Shviis. There's a company, I actually gave them a letter of recommendation. I don't do promos, especially not without getting paid. So I'm not here to promote any business, and I'm not mentioning names. But someone had an idea to sell. He bought a farm in Israel, and he actually is selling lots in that farm. But what is unique about his endeavor is you're makayim all the mitzvahs hatluyas ba'oretz. Truma gedoyle tumas masa, masa rishon, maser oni, and they actually give the aniyim, leket shikha apeya, which is supplied to aniyim, naturally Shviis, and I give him a letter of recommendation, because we're dealing with mitzvahs asay. And that is exactly what Chazal say about Moshe Rabbeinu. But buying a piece of land, Shviis, what mitzvah are you going to be makayim? Not plowing the land. So I wonder if one of those people would call the company and say, I do want to plow the land before Shviis. Could you please take me there? I wonder what will happen. I don't know. So the mitzvah of Shviis Ha'oretz is a lo ta'asa, which you're mekayim b'shev al taisa and not bekum v'asei. And I'll give you a chiddush from Minchas Osha al Shviis Simen Aleph, in which I have a very interesting discussion and a disagreement with some great gedolim. I think a person is makayim the asay and the lo ta'aseh by not working in any field in Israel, whether it's his or it's not his, whether it's Rishus HaRabim or Rishus HaYochid. So the mitzvah to say is V'shovso ha'oretz Shabbos la'Hashem. V'shovso ha'oretz, not necessarily Artzacho. The lo ta'aseh is Sodcho lo tiza, Karmacho lo yisif tzoya. Everybody agrees that if a person works in the land, even though it's not his, he's over on a lav. Dafken the lav, the posuk says sodcho, karmacho. The mitzvah say is v'shovso ha'oretz. So why would anybody think to be makayim the mitzvah say you need to have your own land? But to be over on the lav, even if you work in another man's field, you're over on the lav. Ibcha mistavra. Dafkan the lav, the posuk says, Sod choloi tizra, karma choloi sizmer, and the mitzvah say is v'shovso ha'oretz. So the Minchas Chinuch and some other great gedolim understood that the mitzvah of Shviis Ha'oretz is like the mitzvah of Shvisas Behemtoi. So there's a huge discussion in every sefer that comes out on Shviis. What do? You live in Eretz Yisrael and you have some non-frum neighbors. And you have a little garden before your house. Not a farm, but you have a garden with some flowers. And maybe you might even have a fruit tree. I have a lemon tree in my backyard. And I'm so happy that I have that tree. I have the opportunity to be mafresh to Masashini with a bracha. Not many people have that opportunity. And sometimes I invite some of my friends. Come be zoicha to Masashini with a bracha, because we all buy produce from kosher shops. So most people don't have this opportunity. So the Minchas Chinuch and some others understood that the mitzvah refers to your land. So what does a person do? He lives in a condo with non-frum neighbors, and they have a garden. And the non-frum neighbors tend to the garden in Shviis. They just don't want to leave it growing wild. So most of the Gedolim says you need to be mafker your chelik in the garden. I don't think Hefker is chal. I don't think Hefker is relevant. Because the nature of ownership in Shetach Mishutaf, you have no private usage of this garden. All you have is you enjoy the site, it's nice, and you need to pay. So you're still going to need to pay. Your neighbors won't say, okay, you're a mafker, then you don't need to pay. And if you're a mafker, could somebody from another house come and say, Zachisim and a hefker? Of course not. So this is ownership which is actually imposed on you by the fact that you have a house. If you have a house, you have part in the stairwell, you have part in the passage leading up to your house, you have part in the lobby of the house, and whether you like it or not, you have part in the gardens, and all these shared space is yours. I don't think Hefker would really work. Who's going to be Zoichem in a Hefker? And to me, Shemitah, it's no difference at all whether it's yours or it's not yours. The issue is upon you. What you need to do, if you have a shared garden with none from neighbors, you just need to let them know. I want you to know. If I would have my way, I don't want this work to be done. And it's not done by my consent. You are not my shlichim, you're not working for me. And he has no cheshash isur at all. So, the way I see it, by Shviis behemtoi, laman yenuach, ato, bincho, v'techo, avdecho, v'yamascho, uvehemtecho, asher b'shurecho. Shviis behemtoi refers to your animal, your behemoth, and that is why in Shulchan Aruch, if somebody works with my behemoth, I need to be mafka the behemoth, not by Shviis. By Shviis, ownership has nothing to do with it. So you don't need to own a piece of land in Eretz Yisrael to be Mekayim the mitzvah. The fact that you don't fly to Eretz Yisrael to plow and to sow and to harvest and to work is the same. Doesn't matter whether you have land or not. So let us talk about the essence of mitzvahs. Mitzvahs is all about avoidance Hashem. And Shomerei Shviis are defined by Chazal, Geborei Koyach Oisei Devoroi. This mitzvah is for farmers. And a farmer sees his land barren, and he just trusts HaKadosh Baruch Hu that he will care for him. That is what Shviis Ha'oretz is about. It's not about sitting in Teaneck and for $100 buying a piece of land you don't even know where it is, and that's not the spirit of avoidance Hashem, of mitzvahs. And I do think it's different if we're speaking about matnes aniyim. That's about tzedakah. The Placey, Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz, the Placey in Siman Samach Aleph, Sivkot Nevav in Yoredeya, writes, Chasidim v'Anshe Masa that I know, send money to Eretz Yisrael and have someone buy an animal and shecht it and give zeroya l'chayayim v'kevo to a kohen. And the Placey exalts them. That's a great idea. You're not mechuyev. This mitzvah rests upon people that really have animals, and they shecht animals, and it's matnis kohuna, just like tumas amaisis. But nevertheless, the place he writes, it's an inyan. Send money to Eretz Yisrael. What I wonder about is Roya L'chaim V'Keiv has nothing to do with Eretz Yisrael. Sugis Pshutus in Gemara and the Rambam in Hilchos Bikurim. Roya L'chaim V'Keiv is noig v'chutzos kamo Eretz Yisrael. So what is the place he's talking about sending money to Eretz Yisrael to be Mekayim? So Roya L'chaim V'Keiv, I don't know. But what I want to prove from this place is, when we're dealing with the mitzvahs to say, and it is about giving, of course that's an inyan. Just like tzedakah. Kadosh Baruch Hu wants you to give. Give the kohen, give the Levi, give the aniyim. But Shviis orders, which is not working in the field, I don't see a great merit in buying a piece of land not to work. However, whatever I said up to this moment is by halachic criteria. Shara Gilgulim is one of the Shmoine Sho'orim in Kisvei Ha'ari. The Ri HaKodesh didn't write anything. Kisvei Ha'ari are from his Talmidim, first and foremost, Reb Chaim Vital. Shara Gilgulim Akdami Yud Aleph. Reb Chaim Vital says, according to the Ari, a person should be Mekayim all Taryag Mitzvah Shebetoiro. And if you didn't do it once, you're going to have to come back again and fill in whatever you lost. And that is Shara Gilgulim. You're going to have to come back again and be Mekayim those mitzvahs that you weren't Mekayim first time around. Fascinating Avenessa. Does everybody know who was the Avenessa? Sochet Shavar Rebbe. He was the head of a dynasty, Polish Chassidim. He happened to be one of the greatest Gedolim in the past 200 years. And usually the Avenessa has a split personality. Rebistva Lechud and Shuvas Lechud. Sometimes the Rebbe just charges into the Shuvas. Not very often, but sometimes. In this Shuva as well. Avenessa Siman Aleph and Avenessa. He asks a very powerful question, and I wonder that no one asked it till the Avenessa. According to Halacha, you're married for 10 years, you don't have kids, you need to marry another wife. Number 2, to be Mekayim Prior Vio. That was relevant before Chedem de Rabbeinu Gershon. After Chedem de Rabbeinu Gershon, you can't marry 2 wives. So according to Halacha, you need to divorce your wife and marry another. It's not what most people do. And the Achronim discuss what the Minig Olam is based on, but that's not our topic today. The Avenessa's question is, Tov Reish Nun Vav and Shochan Ochar Achayim, the Ramo writes, Eina Odom al Chayiv Lebazbez Choin Rav al mitzvahs. You don't need to perform a mitzvah say if it'll cost a lot of money. We won't discuss today how much is a lot. Minchas Osha Klolia mitzvahs, there's a fascinating siman on this topic, but it's not what we're talking about this morning. The Avenessa asks, is your beloved wife worth less than $1,000 or $2,000? To perform a mitzvah say, you don't need to spend a lot of money. Priyarvi is a mitzvah say. So how could it be a person needs to divorce his wife, his beloved wife, Eishes Na'urav, to be Mekayim a mitzvah say? $1,000, no. Well, maybe $1,000 is not Hoinrav. $5,000. How could this be? That's an amazing question, and nobody asked it up to the Avenessa. So Avenessa gives a Chassidish answer. Shulchan Aruch deals with Sukkah, with Lulav. If I won't be Mekayim the mitzvah today, I did last year, hope to do next year, and for many years to come, many years in the past. But to lose out a mitzvah all your life, you're going to need to come back again for another Gilgal. And that is why you need to perform this mitzvah while you're alive. And I say, if the Avenessa is right, even Suffolk Gilgal you need to spend so much money. Because how do you know? Maybe this is a mitzvah you did perform in your last Gilgal, or 2 ones back. How do you know? So if a Gilgal is Machayev spending so much money, Suffolk Gilgal. I'm not talking about Gilgal Shavur. You know, there's a big sugi, a few places in Shas about Gilgal Shavur. We're talking about Gilgal and Shamas. That's a different topic. So the Ri HaKodesh said, you need to make an effort to be Mekayim all the mitzvahs. And maybe that is reasoning enough, you know. Invest money, you're going to be Mekayim Shviis, even if it's a suffix. You need to do whatever you can to be Mekayim mitzvahs. Every few months, there are pictures in the Haredi press of a Pidyon Peter Chamor. Those of you that follow the Haredi press usually see those pictures. Very colorful, interesting pictures. Usually it's a Rebbe with a kaftan that has many colors, and you have a little mule with chains and ornaments and tarshitim and a goat. And I wonder whether nobody made a big ceremony about Pidyon Masashini. Every time you're mafresh tumas amaisis, you have Pidyon Masashini. I did it 100 times with the lemons in my backyard. Probably a lemon doesn't make a picture like a goat and a mule. So I wonder why everybody makes a big ceremony out of Pidyon Petach Hamor and not Pidyon Masashini. Both are mitzvahs to say, both are about Pidyon. So there is an Inyan. Try to be Mekayim every mitzvah at least once. In my opinion, the way to solve this problem is Kalo oisig b'toires oila ke'ilu kiyem oila. It's easier to take pictures of a chamor and a keves than to learn the Rambam, Hilchas Pidyon Petach Hamor. So that is the real solution. Say for Minchas Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda Jasfan was in Sana, one of the Gedolim in Yemen, in Taiman, 250 years ago. I think he passed away Tov Kuf. And he quotes the Ari, that a person needs to be Mekayim all the mitzvahs. And if he didn't, he's going to come back again. And when we come back again, that's going to be very painful, because regardless of what lifestyle you had, but once you're up there and you're an animal zivashchino, nothing in this world can compare. You're for sho'acha shel chayo olam haba, mekol chayo olam hazeh. So he writes that this principle, if you lost the mitzvah, you're going to have to come back again, is b'misha einay oisig b'toira. But if you're oisig b'toira and you learn Torah, then that is the best way to be mekayim all the mitzvahs. This sugya starts in Menachos Daf Kuf Yud. Kol oisig b'toiras oila ke'ilu hikrav oila. Kol oisig b'toiras chatas ke'ilu hikrav chatas. Kol oisig b'toira ke'ilu hikrav kol ha-korbanos. We do not find this principle by other mitzvahs. But two giants say this rule applies to all the mitzvahs. The Mabit twice. In the introduction to Kiryas Sefer al Rambam, that's the Mabit's commentary on the Rambam, and in Beis Elokim, Shara Tshuva, Perek Tes, and the Shlo Kodesh, Torah Shebechsav, Os Yud Aleph in the Hagdama, they both say, any mitzvah that you can perform, if you learn the halachas, as if you perform the mitzvah. And that is the way a person could be Makayim Kol HaMitzvahs Shebetoira. If you go through Shas, you go through the Rambam, then you are Makayim all the mitzvahs Shebetoira. Interesting, Rashi and Bov Metzia Kuf Yud Alad Omed Aleph. So in Bov Metzia Kuf Yud Alad we have a strange and fascinating encounter between Rabbi Baravua and Eliyahu Hanavi. And Rabbi Baravua seems to be aware of Eliyahu's presence while he is in a Beis HaKvoros. And a halachic discussion develops between them. And then Rabbi Baravua suddenly is shocked and he says, aren't you a Kohen, Eliyahu? And he says, I am. And he says, but you're in a Beis HaKvoros and you're a Kohen. And Eliyahu responds to Rabbi Baravua and he says, I thought you were a Talmud Chacham. Aren't you aware that Reb Shimon bar Yochai says, Kivrei akum eino mitamim ba'oil? This is a Goyish cemetery, and the quorum of non-Jews is not mitamim ba'oil. And Rabbi Beravua apologizes and he says, I'm not even Boki in 4 Sdorim. Do you expect me to be Boki in 6? I admit, I'm not such a big Talmud Chacham. So Rashi comments, which are the 4 and which are the 6? Zroam and Taris, they didn't learn because they were in Bavel. So mitzvahs atliyas v'oretz weren't relevant. Taharas weren't relevant because it was liachachom beis hamikdash. But then Rashi asks, so how about Kodshim? Why Kodshim they did learn? Rashi says they needed to learn Kodshim because kol ha'oisik b'toras oile kilu ikra v'oila. And dafka because they didn't have a beis hamikdash. So how will we makrav karbonis? So they did learn Kodshim, but they didn't learn Zroim Taharas. And I ask, if this principle refers to all the mitzvahs, like the Mabit and the Shlo say, so why did they learn Kodshim and they did not learn Zroim Taharas? Hadraku sheleduchta. That's not a percha. Because the mitzvahs of Zroim Taharas are never a chiyuv. Not even Bizman Beis Hamikdash or Yokayim. Most of them are, if you engage in certain activities, then you have these mitzvahs. But there's no chiyuv of Tumas HaMaisas, and yes, you eat Peres Eretz Yisrael. But Kodshim is a chiyuv, and Kodshim is also a schus. By Karbonis, it is not only about performing mitzvahs, it is about kapora. It is about rachamei shamayim that Karbonas come to invoke. And that is why they did learn Kodshim, but they didn't learn Zoham and Taharas. So I hope this discussion was an interesting one, and we took a trip, and we visited many different sugyas and sources, and b'chedva Siddush Maitzu, b'shashua shel Torah.